Now before I show you this, keep in mind that each of these squash plants here, the base of the squash plant is... What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a fantastic day. It is Wednesday, April 19th here in South Georgia. On today's video, I'm going to give you a little update on our corn plot. I want to show you just how much it has popped since we healed that corn a few videos ago. We're going to head on over to our in-ground tater plot, see how those plants are doing, see if we can sneak a few taters out of those hills. But before we do that, I want to show you something really cool in one of our raised beds back here where we have some summer squash growing. So here I've got our little worm food container that we keep on the kitchen counter, and this thing is as full as it can be right now. It's actually pretty heavy. So we need to dump this out into this in-bed worm farm, feed these worms some more. But before we do that, I need to show you something pretty awesome, because we probably won't be able to see it once I dump all this in there. So in this tall raised bed here, we've got 3 summer squash plants. They're starting to put on some baby squash there. We've got our worm bed in the middle. Now, completely unrelated to what I'm about to show you, we lost one of our squash plants here the other day. It was looking just like those, and then it just died, wilted down. My guess it's some type of bacteria wilt, something like that. Not really worried about it because the other 3 plants look great, and we're still going to get plenty of squash here. Now, I didn't come over here just to show you one dead squash plant. I wanted to show you something inside this little in-bed worm farm here. Now, before I show you this, keep in mind that each of these squash plants here, the base of the squash plant is a good 2 to 3 foot from where this little worm farm here sits. So let me get inside here. I don't know if the camera's going to let me show it to you or not. So you can see we've got all kind of goodies in there, all kind of scraps for our worms to eat. And if we dig around in here a little bit, that's where we can start to see lots of worms. There's a bunch of worms right there. Now, I don't know if you can see this or not. Dadgum, there's a bunch of worms right there. It's too dark for you to see. But right here on the edge of this little worm bin, you can see roots sticking through those little holes there. Okay, I upped the exposure on the camera. Hopefully it's not too blown out. But there's a ton of worms right around there. And there you can see those roots sticking through these little holes. Those roots are coming from a good ways away over there where that squash plant sits. Now, I've pulled up many a squash plant at this place over the years. Squash is one of those things we don't try to compost. We throw it in the burn pile because we can have so many disease issues with squash. So I've pulled up a lot of squash plants. I know they can have a decent sized root system, but I've never seen squash plants with roots that big. It's just crazy neat to me how they are seeking out what's going on in that little worm farm there. I don't necessarily know where they're seeking out some kind of nutrient in the scraps we're putting in there, or they're seeking out those worm castings. I don't really know what they're seeking, but they like what's going on in that worm farm in the center of that bed. Now, not even considering the fact that our worm population inside here is thriving and doing very well, just the fact that we were able to grow squash roots that large is a win for this little unit right here. So I'm really liking this so far. It's time to go ahead and feed them the rest of these scraps here. Lettuce, coffee, carrot shavings, parsnip shavings, eggshells, all kind of good stuff right there. Put the top back on that. Now, we have yet to see whether we are going to be able to keep this thing moist and cool enough in the heat of summer and keep these worms alive. That story is yet to be told, but so far this is working really well. All right, now for a little corn update here. So over the last few weeks, we have done a lot of healing in our backyard garden plots. We've healed taters, we've healed maters, we've healed corn. And I told you every time that we healed all this stuff, that once you heal it, just sit back and watch. It will make these plants pop. Even if you don't side dress before you heal, we always do, but even if you don't, it will still make the plants pop. And it has indeed made this corn behind me pop. So since we side dressed and healed this corn, I don't know, just about a week or so ago, I swear it has grown a foot. and it has gotten a lot greener than it was. Still not quite as dark green as I'd like it to be, but we're getting there. And we can't give all the credit to that side dressing because, as you can see there, some of that Nature Safe 1300 is still breaking down. So a lot of this fast growth and a lot of this greening up has to do with healing. Now, for some things we grow in the backyard garden, take for example that squash I showed you earlier, no need to heal things like that. We don't need to heal everything we grow, but for your corn, for your tomatoes, and for your taters, go ahead and heal them and watch them take off afterwards. And speaking of taters, I've got 3 pretty big, thirsty rows of taters right behind me. Now, we don't know yet whether it's actually going to translate into some nice tuber production, but these are some of the biggest tater plants I have ever grown. These 3 rows here are starting to merge together a little bit. Now, we don't use drip irrigation on taters, we just overhead water them every now and then, and these are starting to look a little thirsty today. So up until this week, we've been getting enough rain to keep even these big tater plants happy here. I think a few weekends ago, I stood out here for about 30 minutes with a little hand wand and watered them in a little bit, but that's really all the watering I've done. Been getting some rain every 3 or 4 days, which has kept them pretty happy. Today it's warm out here. We hadn't had any rain in 4 or 5 days or so, so I'm probably going to have to give them a little overhead water this afternoon. Keep them nice and happy as they're in the last month of their growth. Now, it's kind of hard to see the individual rows, but just to kind of recap what we have planted here, we've got a variety called Baltic Rose there in that first row. Then we've got Huckleberry Gold. Those have the tallest plants so far. And then we have this variety over here called Prairie Blush. Now, what we're seeing here solidifies my opinion that potato blooms don't really mean anything. These Huckleberry Gold tater plants were the last ones to emerge, last ones to get going. They're also the only ones that have bloomed here. These Baltic Rose plants, which should be much further along, no blooms on those. Same thing over there with Prairie Blush, no blooms on those. So the blooms just happen sometimes they don't happen. Doesn't really give you any indication as far as how many taters you're going to get or when it's ready to harvest or anything like that. Sometimes you get them, sometimes you don't. Now, I have heard of a few folks already scratching out a few taters from underneath their plants, even though their plants aren't showing any signs of dying back. That's something you can do. So far, I have been abstaining from that practice for a couple different reasons. One, I always like to harvest all mine at one time, weigh the yield from each variety, take into account how many pounds of seed taters I planted, and calculate my multiple there. Helps me say if I had a good tater year or not, and also helps me compare varieties. And then the second reason I've been abstaining from scratching goes back to that interview we did with Jim at Wood Prairie, where we got these seed taters here. And if you recall, during one of those interviews, part 1 or part 2, can't remember which one it was, Jim mentioned that taters will size up significantly in their last days. So even though the plants start dying back and looking pretty pitiful, those tubers are still enlarging underneath the soil there. And he mentioned if the weather will allow you to do so, it's best to let those plants die back completely. Now, if you start getting a lot of rain, you need to go ahead and dig your taters so they don't start rotting in the soil. But if you've got some nice dry weather, he recommends letting them die back completely. You'll get maximal size that way. I haven't always done that, but that was something I was wanting to try this year. So I wasn't going to scratch out any early taters, but inside I've got a chuck roast in the crock pot with some of our onions and some of our carrots. And if you're going to eat chuck roast with onions and carrots, you almost just have to have some taters with it. And I didn't really want to go to the store today and buy any taters, so I am going to see if I can find me a few here. So we're going to see if we can sneak a few out of this row of Baltic Rose taters here. These were the first to emerge. I think they are probably the farthest along compared to these other 2 rows, so I'm hopeful. Got the ground cracking right there pretty good. That should be a good sign. So let's see if we can find any treasure right here. I don't want to disrupt a whole lot if I can help it. surely I've got a few taters forming down there already. There we go. There's one. Probably gonna need more than one to satisfy that chuck roast in there. Might end up just having to pull up one of these plants here. That'll be all right. There we go. Not real big. Still a lot of sizing up to do on those. But might end up getting us enough here for supper tonight. And we've got enough taters planted, we can sacrifice a few plants for the sake of our chuck roast. There we go. There we go. That's what I'm talking about right there. Man, that's some nice tater dirt right there. All right, so we got us a little mess there. We don't need a whole lot, just enough for tonight, and a couple taters a piece. That should work there. So I harvested 2 plants there, got a few taters, but these got a lot of sizing up left to do in the next month. If you've got plenty of tater plants and you get hungry, yes, you can dig them early like this. But if you want them to reach their full potential, wait until those plants start dying back, or wait till they die back completely for the biggest possible taters you could ask for. These got a long way to go, but these are gonna fill our bellies tonight. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and let me know in the comments below what you think about our massive squash roots over there. What do you think those roots are actually seeking out amongst that little worm farm there? Be sure to check out our affiliate links in the description below. Go check out our website, lazydogfarm.com. And if you want to see us set up that in-bed worm farm and show our other bigger worm farm over there by the barn, check out this video right here where we put that whole system together, add the worms to it, bury it, and get it going. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.